Before Rome, before kings and cathedrals, there were stories born in mist, whispered through forest glades and etched into stone. Welcome to the forgotten world of Celtic myth. The Celts were never one people, but a tapestry of tribes stretching from Ireland and Scotland to Gaul, Galicia, and the edges of the Danube. They left no written mythologies, their stories lived in the mouths of bards and the minds of warriors. To them, every tree, every stone, every river held spirit. The world was alive, and their myths, raw, fragmented and wild, were as much about the land as the gods. Unlike Greek or Norse mythology, the Celtic world had no strict pantheon, no linear creation story. There was the other world, a place of eternal youth, beauty, and peril, accessible through mist, through caves, lakes, or dreams. The veil between worlds was thin. Spirits moved freely. Shape-shifting animals, deathless warriors, godlike beings walking beside mortals. Dreams foretold fate, poets held power, and magic was truth made visible. Central to many myths are the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. They were powerful, beautiful, wise, masters of magic and craft. Not quite gods, not quite mortal. When invaders came, the Milesians, the Tuatha did not die, they faded, retreating into the hills and under the earth. They became the Ailshi, the fairy folk, not tiny wings and sparkles, but dangerous, proud beings with old power. Celtic stories are not stories of triumph. They are stories of cycles, battles fought knowing they will be lost, kings cursed by pride, love twisted by time, prophecy fulfilled but never understood. Heroes like Cuchulainn, Fionn Macuail, Deirdre of the Sorrows. They didn't conquer, they struggled. Their tales end in madness, betrayal, or death, and yet they are remembered. Not for winning, but for enduring. In this series we'll explore 9 stories, from ancient curses to doomed romances, magical battles, and strange creatures of the in-between. This is not mythology told from a throne. It's mythology carved into the land, wild, wounded, and waiting to be remembered. Step through the mist, the Celtic world awaits. In the time before written word, before the ink of monks or the iron of invaders, there was a world woven with magic, shrouded in mist, ruled not by men but by gods. This was the island of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. Not deities in the modern sense, but beings of immense power, shapers of the land, of weather, of fate. And among them was Lear. Lear was a noble lord of great renown. He was the master of the seas, a figure both respected and feared. To the people of ancient era, Lear was not merely a king, he was a symbol of the wildness and wisdom of nature itself. He lived in a great hall by the water's edge, surrounded by misty hills, sacred stones, and the whisper of waves. There he raised 4 children, Fionnuala, the eldest, poised and protective, Aed, bright as a flame, and the twin boys, Fiachra and Con, inseparable and curious. Their laughter filled the air like birdsong. They played among wild deer beneath the oaks, beside enchanted lakes. They were cherished not just by their father, but by the people of the land. But joy is a fragile thing. Lear's beloved wife, their mother, died young. Grief hung over the hall like a low fog, and in his sorrow, Lear was persuaded to remarry to Aoife, sister of the woman he had loved. It was meant as a gesture of healing, of unity, but Aoife was not her sister. At first, she hid her envy well. She smiled, she offered gifts, she sang lullabies to the children. But inside, her heart twisted. Each affectionate glance from Lear to his children, each story Fionnuala shared, each laugh from the twins, gnawed at Aoife's soul. She wanted her husband's heart, undivided, and so she began to plan. She studied forbidden magic. She whispered dark words in sacred groves. And one day, she offered to take the children to visit their grandfather, as a kind gesture, she said. But kindness was no part of her journey. She drove the chariot to Lake Derravara, a still silver lake where time seemed to pause. There, as mists curled above the water, Aoife stepped down, raised her hand, and unleashed her spell. In the name of wind and wave, I strip you of your forms. 300 years on this lake, 300 on the stormy sea of Moyle, and 300 more where no man will find you. In a flash, the children vanished, and in their place, 4 swans, elegant, white, graceful, but with eyes that held grief and memory. They tried to speak, but only songs came. Haunting melodies filled the air. Fionnuala, ever the protector, kept her brothers close. She sang to comfort them, songs of home, of warm fires, of their mother's laughter. And the songs were so beautiful, so sorrowful, that they drew people from distant villages just to hear the swans sing. 300 years passed on Lake Derravara. They watched seasons come and go. They saw strangers settle the land. They saw stone forts rise and fall. But they did not age. They did not rest. Then came the Sea of Moyle, a harsh, bitter ocean between Ireland and Scotland. There the waves were cruel. The storms tore at their feathers. The cold numbed their hearts. Ae and the twins huddled together, Fionnuala wrapping her wings around them, shielding them from snow and lightning. Ships passed, nations warred, and the children endured. The third part of their exile brought them to the western shores, where the land was empty and overgrown. No music, no fires, no friendly voices. They cried to the wind, but only gulls answered. And then a soft bell, a monk's voice, a candle in the dark. By the time their curse lifted, the world had changed. Gone were the Tuatha Dé Danann. The old gods had vanished into mounds and memory. In their place, the cross, stone churches, new prayers. The monk, moved by their story, baptized them, and with that act, the spell broke. They were human again, but aged in an instant, frail, bones creaking like branches in winter, and soon after they passed, not in sorrow, but in peace. The children of Lear were buried side by side, wrapped in cloth and in legend, and to this day it is said that if you stand beside Lake Derravara at dawn, you may hear music in the mist, a swan's call, a sister's lullaby, the echo of a world where gods once walked. And thus their tale endures, not just in myth, but in the wind, the water, and the weeping of swans. Long ago, in the ethereal halls of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the divine race of Celtic gods, lived a king named Medea. Medea was noble, proud and fair, but his heart was heavy with sorrow. His first wife, Fuamnach, was powerful and cunning, steeped in ancient magic, but their love had withered, and the void it left behind would soon be filled by another. One day, Medea visited the court of his foster son, Ériu, in the mortal realm. There, he laid eyes upon Étaín, radiant, kind and graceful, with hair like sunlight on water. She was no ordinary woman. Étaín was the reborn soul of a goddess, though neither she nor Medea knew it yet. Struck by her beauty and gentle spirit, Medea fell deeply in love. Étaín, in turn, was drawn to the god. Their bond grew swiftly. Despite the world between them, mortal and divine, they wed in secret. But Medea had underestimated Fuamnach's jealousy. Fuamnach, filled with bitter rage, unleashed her full magical might upon Étaín. She conjured a powerful wind that swept the unsuspecting woman into the sky. Étaín was torn from her husband's arms, cast adrift through time and space for 7 long years. Wherever she rested, on mountain tops, in forests, or on the banks of rivers, the storm found her again and again. Eventually, Étaín was transformed. No longer human, she became a pool of water, then a worm, then a butterfly. And yet her soul endured. As a butterfly, she hovered near her old home, unseen by Medea, who mourned her absence. She fluttered across the land, delicate and persistent, until fate intervened. Years passed. In the kingdom of Ulster, a queen sat lonely and childless. One day, a butterfly flew into her chamber and landed softly on her shoulder. The queen inhaled deeply, and Étaín's essence entered her. In time, she gave birth to a daughter, Étaín, reborn once again in human form. Unaware of her divine origins, Étaín grew into a woman of exceptional beauty and wisdom. Kings and warriors vied for her hand, but it was Eochaid, High King of Ireland, who won her love and married her. She lived quietly, unaware of her past lives or her connection to Medea. But the gods do not forget. Medea, still grieving and longing, searched for her relentlessly. At last, he discovered her rebirth. He approached Eochaid's court in disguise, challenging the king to a series of board games known as Figil. Medea played skillfully, and with each win, he asked for greater rewards, livestock, land, and finally a single kiss from Étaín. Eochaid laughed off the request, not realizing the true identity of the man he played. But when Medea won again, the king had no choice but to honor his promise. As Étaín leaned in, Medea revealed himself, embracing her. Together they transformed into swans and vanished into the skies, leaving Eochaid and his court in stunned silence. The High King pursued them, scouring the land and summoning druids to aid his search. Eventually he discovered Medea's otherworldly palace, Brí Leith, hidden beyond the veil of this world. Eochaid stormed the fairy mound, demanding Étaín's return. Medea offered a cruel challenge. He presented 50 identical women, all resembling Étaín, and told Eochaid he could take one if he could identify his wife. Eochaid studied them closely, choosing the one he believed was hers. But Medea had tricked him. The woman Eochaid chose was actually Étaín's daughter, born of her time with the High King before her abduction. Devastated by the revelation, Eochaid left in shame. And so Medea and Étaín were reunited at last, in the land of the gods beyond time and sorrow. Their love, tested across lifetimes, broken by jealousy and bound by fate, endures as one of the most haunting and tragic tales in Celtic mythology. It reminds us that the threads of love and identity can stretch across centuries, tangled in magic, memory, and the whims of the divine. In the shadowed hills of ancient Ulster, among the high grass and stones of Ériu, a legend was born. Not of gods, but of a mortal who stood beside them. This is the origin of Chulainn, Ireland's greatest warrior, and his story begins with a boy named Setanta. Setanta was no ordinary child. Born to the mortal woman Daishtin, and as some claimed, the god Lu himself, the boy carried strength and purpose far beyond his years. Even as a child, his feats set him apart. While other boys played in fields, Setanta trained with spear and shield. He moved with uncanny speed, and when he struck, his blows landed with the weight of prophecy. At just 7 years old, Setanta heard that his uncle, King Conhor MacNessa, was attending a feast at the house of Chulainn, the smith. Young Setanta wished to join them, but he had a game to finish first. Conhor left early, assuring the smith that no one else would be coming. Unaware of the boy's plans, Chulainn loosed his great guard hound, an enormous beast, fierce enough to tear through warriors. But as twilight fell, Setanta arrived at the gates, humming a tune to himself. The hound charged, teeth flashing, eyes wild with rage. Without hesitation, the boy stood his ground. With a single strike of his Hurlian ball, Setanta sent the dog crashing lifeless to the ground. Chulainn, heartbroken by the loss of his protector, demanded to know who had killed the beast. But Setanta, noble even in youth, did not hide. He offered his life in service as repayment. "I will raise a new hound," he said, "and guard your home until it is grown." And so he earned the name that would echo through centuries, Chulainn, the Hound of Chulainn. From that moment the boy became a symbol, trained in arms by the finest warriors of Ulster, and later sent to the legendary warrior woman Scáthach in distant Alba, what we now call Scotland. Chulainn was forged into a force unlike any other. Under Scáthach's brutal guidance, he learned the arts of battle, sorcery and focus. She taught him the Gai Bulge, a spear with barbs that could only be unleashed with one precise strike, and that could never be withdrawn without tearing its victim apart. But even before his formal training, the signs of his destiny were clear. One tale tells of how, at the age of 7, he wandered into the warriors' field at Ammonmacha, where the Ulster boys were training. They mistook him for an intruder and attacked. Chulainn, in a fit of frenzy, defeated 50 boys with nothing but a toy sword and raw instinct. The warriors who witnessed this knew a hero had emerged. Even the gods seemed to tremble before his battle rage, his riastrad, or warp spasm. In battle his body twisted, expanded, and transformed into something monstrous. One eye would sink deep, the other bulge grotesquely. His muscles would knot and swell. He became something beyond human, a creature of war, vengeance, and prophecy. Yet Chulainn was not just a weapon. Beneath the fury lived a loyal heart. He was beloved by his people and deeply bound to Ulster by honor, duty, and fate. Time and again, he rose to defend it, not for power or glory, but because it was right. But his path, though heroic, was never gentle. Destiny would see to that. By the end of his life, he would be known as Ireland's greatest hero. But here, in the dawn of his story, we see something more profound. A boy who chose to serve, a child who stepped into myth with open eyes and steady hands. The boy who would become the Hound of Ulster. Across the storm-lashed sea, past the edge of Ireland's green hills, there lies a place wrapped in mist and legend, a land known to the Celts as the Isle of Shadows. Here, among the jagged cliffs and dark woods, lived a warrior unlike any other, Scáthach, the shadowy one. She was neither goddess nor mere mortal. Scáthach was a master of combat, feared and revered across the Celtic world. Her fortress, Dunscath, the Fortress of Shadows, stood like a blade carved into the rock of Skye. Warriors came from far and wide to train under her, but few returned unchanged, and fewer still ever saw her at all. It was to this forbidding place that Chulainn travelled, sent by fate and ambition to master the arts of war. His journey was not simple. Crossing to Alba was perilous. Treacherous waters, hostile warriors, and beasts of legend stood in his way, but he pressed forward, undeterred, and at last reached the blackened coast beneath Scáthach's citadel. The island tested him from the start. As he scaled the cliffs to reach the fortress, magical traps and illusions tried to turn him back. Time lost meaning in the mist. Days bled into nights, and shadows whispered warnings. Yet Chulainn pressed on, and finally, Scáthach herself appeared, not with fanfare, but with silence. She observed him before speaking a single word: "You may enter." Training under Scáthach was brutal and unlike anything Chulainn had faced before. She taught not only the blade, but the balance of the soul, the arts of warcraft, stealth, precision, and honor. She showed him how to control the Rí-Ustrad, that terrifying battle frenzy that could consume him. Under her guidance, he learned when to release the fury and when to hold it back. But Scáthach also held secrets. Magic, prophecy, and ancient techniques lost to time were passed to her students, if they proved worthy. Chief among these was the Guy Bulg, the barbed spear that could only be thrown with the toes and delivered death in one strike. No warrior wielding it had ever been bested. Scáthach didn't give it freely. She waited until Chulainn showed not only skill, but judgment. Only then did she reveal the weapon's technique and its curse. Once loosed, she said, it cannot be called back. Yet the Isle of Shadows held more than just knowledge. Aoife, Scáthach's sister and rival, led her own faction of warriors. War between the sisters had raged for years, silent, personal, and bitter. Chulainn, unknowing, challenged Aoife in single combat as part of his trials. The duel was ferocious. Aoife was strong, clever, and unyielding. But Chulainn used guile, not brute strength. He distracted her by claiming her horses were falling off a cliff. When she glanced away, he struck and won. Later, he spared her life, at Scáthach's urging. What followed, some tales say, was a tragic romance between the two. From that union, a child was born, Connla, whose fate would haunt a later episode in this saga. But here, in the halls of Dun Scaith, Chulainn was reforged. The boy who had defeated a hound had become a man who could defeat armies. When his training ended, Scáthach did not bless him with grand farewells. She merely said, "Go, the world waits for you." And so he returned to Ulster, his spirit sharpened, his body hardened, and his path set. In Celtic lore, Scáthach is more than a mentor. She is the shadow behind the blade, the wisdom behind the strike. Without her, Chulainn might never have become the Hound of Ulster. She gave him not just strength, but focus, a deeper purpose in a world of chaos and war. Even centuries later, warriors whispered her name with a mix of fear and respect. The Isle of Shadows may have vanished into mist, but the legacy of Scáthach remains, etched into every tale of honor, courage, and the high cost of becoming a hero. And so, the first threads of the tale have been spun. We've walked alongside heroes, stood in the presence of gods, and watched ancient forces shape the fates of mortals and immortals alike. But in the world of Celtic myth, no story ever truly ends. It merely gives way to the next. There are whispers still unheard, paths yet untaken, and shadows stirring just beyond the veil. The tales grow darker, stranger, and more powerful from here. And if you listen closely, there are always more tales to tell.